In a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, one young woman vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a silence that felt almost unnatural. A mother-to-be, a family divided, and a mystery that only grew darker with every passing hour. What happened in those final moments before Tiffany Adams disappeared, and why did the truth take so long to surface? This is the story that shook an entire community to its core.
Sullivan, Indiana, was the kind of small, peaceful town where residents rarely locked their doors and people greeted each other by name at the grocery store. For most, it was a place of routine and safety. Until November 5, 2014. That day, a quiet storm began brewing, one that would expose secrets, test relationships, and ultimately shatter the sense of normalcy that the town had always taken for granted. 20-year-old Tiffany Adams, 8 months pregnant and looking forward to becoming a mother, started her day like any other. She had been staying with her father, Bruce Adams, the man who raised her, even though he wasn't her biological father. Their bond was strong. Bruce had always been her protector, the person she turned to when life felt overwhelming. That morning, Tiffany told Bruce she was heading to her mother, Christina's house. It was a short walk, barely minutes away, and nothing about that simple decision hinted at the tragedy ahead. As Tiffany stepped out of Bruce's door, no one could predict that these were the last confirmed moments anyone would see her alive. Hours passed, daylight faded, and still no sign of Tiffany. Bruce expected her to come back, or at least call, but she never did. At first he tried not to panic. Maybe she stayed at her mother's longer than planned. Maybe she was resting. Maybe she had turned her phone off. But deep inside, something felt wrong. The next morning came with no news. Then another day passed. The worry grew into fear. On November 7th, Bruce finally reported Tiffany missing. Not because he didn't worry sooner, he did, but because he believed a common myth, that you have to wait 24 to 48 hours before reporting a missing person, especially an adult. That delay, though unintentional, would later haunt him. Police took the case seriously from the start. Tiffany wasn't someone who simply wandered off. She was heavily pregnant, emotionally vulnerable, and preparing for the arrival of her baby. She had responsibilities, routines, and people counting on her. Vanishing without explanation was completely out of character. Investigators began with the last people to see her and the people closest to her. First on the list was her boyfriend, Donnie. Donnie had spent time with Tiffany earlier that day, and his sudden departure from town shortly after her disappearance raised immediate suspicion. Why leave town at such a critical moment? Why not help in the search for the woman he claimed to love? But Donnie wasn't the only person police were looking at. When Bruce Adams spoke to investigators, he expressed a deep concern about someone else, Brian O., Tiffany's stepfather and her mother's husband. Bruce and Brian had a complicated, strained history, worsened by Tiffany's complaints that Brian tried to control her contact with her mother. Tiffany had recently vented on social media about her frustration, hinting at tension within the household. These posts, though emotional and personal, added another layer to the growing mystery. Then came the most chilling early clue. Bruce told police that on the day Tiffany disappeared, she had tried calling him 3 times. When he answered, he heard alarming sounds, a man yelling, and Tiffany's voice saying, "Dad, Dad," before the call suddenly cut off. The calls were short, fragmented, and filled with noise he couldn't fully understand, but they terrified him. For investigators, these calls were a red flag. They suggested Tiffany wasn't just missing, something had happened during those moments. As detectives dug deeper, they realized that the web of relationships surrounding Tiffany was more tangled than they had first expected. Her mother, Christina, was caught between her daughter and her husband, Brian. Bruce and Brian shared years of built-up conflict. Tiffany's romantic relationships, too, were more complex than they first appeared. It wasn't long before police learned that Donnie wasn't the biological father of the baby. That role belonged to Paul Aradam McHenry, Tiffany's high school ex-boyfriend. Paul, however, had a confirmed alibi that placed him far from Sullivan that day. So while the revelation complicated Tiffany's life, it didn't point toward a motive. The investigation moved forward with a sharp focus on the people closest to Tiffany that morning. On November 11th, police obtained a search warrant for Christina and Brian's home. Officers combed through every room, gathering anything that might provide a lead. They didn't find evidence of a struggle or anything directly connecting them to Tiffany's disappearance, but something subtle yet suspicious stood out. The motion-activated security camera on the property was missing its memory card. Someone had removed it. That discovery raised immediate questions. Why would a memory card be missing at the exact time someone in the home had become the focus of a missing person investigation? Was it a coincidence or an attempt to hide something? Investigators continued following multiple leads at once. Meanwhile, they located and questioned Tiffany's boyfriend, Donnie. He insisted he was innocent. He claimed he loved Tiffany, that he would never hurt her, and that his decision to leave town had nothing to do with her disappearance. Still, his odd behavior and unwillingness to help early on cast doubt on his story. But there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to anything concrete. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. With each passing day, hope faded a little more. Sullivan's residents became restless. Rumors spread. Conversations whispered through the aisles of grocery stores and over quiet dinners. Everyone wanted Tiffany found. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone feared the worst. And then, nearly 2 months after Tiffany vanished, those fears were confirmed. On December 30th, 2014, 2 farmers discovered a body in a remote cornfield in Sullivan County. Though the scene was difficult to process due to the time that had passed, investigators were eventually able to confirm the heartbreaking truth. It was Tiffany. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was now a homicide case. Sullivan would never be the same again.
When Tiffany's body was discovered in the cornfield at the end of December, the heartbreaking confirmation sent shockwaves through Sullivan. The peaceful town that rarely made headlines found itself at the center of a devastating investigation involving an 8-month pregnant woman whose life was abruptly stolen. The community mourned, but investigators had to push through their grief. They needed to find out who did this and why. The autopsy, though limited due to time and outdoor conditions, provided crucial information. It revealed that Tiffany's cause of death was consistent with strangulation. For investigators, this meant one thing. This wasn't an accident or a moment of panic. Someone had confronted Tiffany and taken her life intentionally. But who? The search for answers turned investigators back toward Tiffany's relationships, especially those that carried tension, disagreements, or long-standing emotional conflict. And that path led them once again to the Orr family. Tiffany's mother, Christina, her husband, Brian Orr, and Brian's son, Jonas Orr, Tiffany's half-brother. Initially, Brian had been under suspicion due to the missing memory card from his security camera. Cameras don't lose their cards. Someone takes them out. And the timing couldn't be ignored. However, there was no physical evidence from the home connecting Brian to Tiffany's disappearance, so investigators shifted their focus to Tiffany's final phone activity. Phone records revealed that Tiffany had been texting Amber Orr, the wife of Jonas and someone Tiffany often helped with childcare. Amber shared a phone with Jonas, and that phone had exchanged messages with Tiffany on the day she vanished. When investigators questioned Amber and Jonas, they both claimed they had been at a video rental store during the time of Tiffany's disappearance, a place investigators immediately checked for verification. The store confirmed their visit, but something was off.
The timestamps in the store's system didn't match the timeline they described. This discrepancy didn't prove guilt, but it proved something else. Jonas wasn't being fully honest. Investigators decided to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Tiffany's phone became the next major breakthrough. On August 27, 2015, nearly a year after her disappearance, her phone was recovered from Lake Sullivan. The water damage was severe, but modern digital forensics are powerful. Specialists worked to extract whatever remained inside the device. What they found changed the entire case. Even though messages had been deleted, data recovery tools retrieved conversations involving Jonas, messages he thought would never be seen again. These weren't just casual chats, they formed part of the timeline investigators desperately needed. Combined with cell tower data, Tiffany's phone showed rapid movement shortly after she left Bruce's home. It didn't make sense for a heavily pregnant woman to be walking so fast. That meant one thing: Tiffany got into a vehicle. The question was, whose? The next breakthrough came when detectives learned that Jonas had borrowed a vehicle, a Chevy Blazer, from a friend named Jim Fish on the exact day Tiffany disappeared. Jonas later returned the vehicle almost 6 hours late, claiming it had broken down. Jim thought this was strange. Jonas didn't seem stressed or dirty as someone dealing with a vehicle breakdown would. Still, Jim didn't push it. He had no reason to suspect something sinister. But investigators did. They took possession of the Blazer and conducted a forensic fiber examination. What they found was small, but explosive. Red fibers. Fibers that matched Tiffany's red fleece jacket. This was no longer coincidence, no longer suspicion. This was physical evidence placing Tiffany in the vehicle Jonas borrowed that day. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. On November 5th, Tiffany left Bruce's home and headed toward her mother's. According to Christina and Brian, they were working on an apartment renovation that day, an alibi that might have cleared them. But cell tower analysis contradicted them. Their phones had been pinging near home, not near the apartment. This didn't necessarily make them guilty. It simply meant they lied. The lies could have been attempts to avoid blame, attempts to protect someone, or something as simple as fear of being pulled into the middle of the storm. However, one person's timeline stood out as far more concerning: Jonas's. Investigators now believed that while Tiffany was on her way to her mother's house, Jonas intercepted her. How and why? Evidence suggested their relationship was tense. Reports indicated a long-standing feud between them, one that worsened by Tiffany criticizing Jonas's father, Brian, on social media and in personal conversations. Jonas, extremely close to Brian, may have seen her criticisms as disrespect, not just toward him, but toward the people he cared most about. These underlying issues might not have seemed dangerous at first, but investigators understood that tension unattended can escalate. With the Blazer evidence, the missing memory card, the phone records, and Jonas's questionable alibi, the case had finally landed on firm ground. Police confronted Jonas. He denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with Tiffany's death, but the evidence was stacking up, and it didn't lie. Then came an unexpected source of information, an inmate named John Clean, who later shared a cell with Jonas. According to John Clean, Jonas talked about the case. He described what happened, why it happened, and expressed remorse, but only for the baby, not Tiffany. According to John Clean, Jonas questioned whether God would forgive him. He never said Tiffany's name. He never expressed regret for her. This testimony became a crucial piece of the puzzle. In July 2016, after nearly 2 years of slow, careful investigation, Jonas Orr stood before a judge. Despite denying his involvement in court, the evidence told a different story. The timeline, the vehicle fibers, the recovered texts, and the witness testimony painted a clear and tragic picture. The verdict? Guilty. 2 counts. Tiffany Adams, and her unborn baby. Jonas was sentenced to 2 consecutive 60-year prison terms, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Justice, though delayed, had finally come, but the scars remained on Tiffany's family, on the community, and on everyone who followed the case. Her story became a painful reminder of how hidden tensions can escalate into unimaginable consequences, and how digital evidence, even long after the fact, can speak louder than any lie. Though gone, Tiffany's memory continues to remind the world of the importance of early reporting, community awareness, and the need to protect those most vulnerable.
If you're still here watching, thank you. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, Dark Frame Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery like this.